Hi there, my name is Neal and I am one of the percussionists in the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Thought today we'd have a little look at the percussion multi-percussion setup. As you can see, I've put together quite a few instruments here. The challenge ended up being basically to see how many instruments I could fit into the smallest space in my house, which is the study here. This is very often where I do some of my practice. So there we go, we've got an array of instruments which we'll go through very shortly. It came to my mind when I was putting this all together that we very often have challenges of space. When we go to concert halls all around the world, very often we don't get enough space. We need to have quite a lot of depth. As you can see, we need from here through to there, we need quite a deep riser or part of the platform in order to be able to put together these multi-percussion setups. It doesn't always happen. That's one of the challenges. It's not very often where we turn up in a venue and there we say, oh look, we've got lots and lots of space to set up in to help us get all our gear in the right spaces where we need to be able, so we can all reach it all and get to it all nice and cleanly. So it doesn't happen very often, but every now and then there are good concert halls. When I was putting this together, this setup, it did remind me of several years ago when we were in Edinburgh and we did a performance of Bliss. It was an opera called Bliss by an Australian composer called Brett Dean. I believe Brett Dean's been mentioned in one of the other videos that one of my other colleagues has done for this particular series. Brett Dean writes very, very, very well for the percussion section. And this was the type of setup that I had to put together for it. Very often his stuff is very challenging, his music is very challenging to play. But if you spend a bit of time learning it, then it can end up being extremely enjoyable to put it all together. I remember when I was building this, of course it was in the pit, because it was an opera, I was in the pit. And you can't see it, but right behind me here I've got a gong. And I put everything together. And then I had two tam-tams to go right behind me, and there just wasn't enough space with the stands. So in the end, we ended up sort of like breaking the stands into pieces and screwing bits of the stand onto the back wall of the pit so that we could just get the tam-tams in behind me. We managed it, we got there. So just to go through some of these multi-percussion scenarios, generally what's the most comfortable, I suppose, for a percussionist is a setup not dissimilar to this, but generally we would have one tuned percussion instrument. So either a xylophone or a marimba or a vibraphone or even a glockenspiel. They work very well. So we put that in the center. We then put the music stand in front of that, which is then directly in line with the conductor from there. That seems the most sensible thing to do with a tuned percussion instrument. So we're playing like this with the music, with the conductor. We can then tuck lots and lots of other instruments around the front of the marimba or around the sides and then build around the back. So instruments that fit very well around, let's say for instance, a marimba would be, you could have some tom-toms on this side. You could then have some wood blocks and temple blocks and cowbells, similar to what I've got here. It is possible sometimes to fit a pedal bass drum underneath an instrument, but not always, depending on what the frame gives you. You can tuck in a little mounted tambourine like I've got here. So that gives you a couple of layers. And then on the top layer, we can then get cymbals on top of that. So you can have China cymbals like I have here. I've got other normal suspended cymbals. There's a little splash in here. Obviously there's a multitude of cymbals that you can use. I remember for the Brett Dean setup, I think I counted up, I think it was at least 9 or 10 cymbals I had. So that was literally going all the way around the top. So then when you've got those round there, if you want to have some bigger instruments, then you can have behind you, you can have, which I haven't got space for here, you can have maybe a bass drum here, or a tam-tam, or 2 or 3 tam-tams. Bass drum can fit very nicely up the side at the bottom end of a marimba. That's great. You can either have it tilted or flat, however you want it. And then at the top end, you could maybe have a set of tubular bells as well. I've got the tubular bells over there. That's just happened where they happen to fit in today. So that just gives you an idea of what's possible to get around the one tuned instrument. The reason why I mention that is if we go to two tuned instruments, so say you ask to, you write for a marimba and a vibraphone, they're very difficult instruments to get in close to each other. So therefore you're then looking at having two music stands for each instrument, and then therefore two different music parts. And so then you're running from one instrument to the other. Now these things are possible, but you're not going to be obviously getting to one instrument very quickly to the other. Whereas when you've got your one instrument with the other things, you can get to all the other instruments very, very carefully. You know, if you've got bongos and congas or something over here, that can work very nicely as well. So think of the layers that can go up. That's the way how you can build it up. Okay, so let's go through a couple of sticks that you can use. If I just start with my wooden snare drum sticks, I'm not going to put the snares on because they tend not to sound too good on a video, so I'm going to leave the snares off and just give you some sounds with these. So the wooden sticks can get you around those instruments very, very nicely. A little bit of hi-hat. We very often get Burt Whistle loves using hi-hat and opening and closing hi-hat. So things like that. All right, so got some very useful sticks here. These are sort of medium hardish rubber, and they can get you around lots of these instruments very successfully. Then with the same sticks, if you turn them round like I just have, you can get some really nice effects with the cane. These are double-ended sticks. So we've got the normal snare drum sticks this end, and then on this end we've got felt sticks. These are great. Sound very, very nice on the very nice on the tom-toms. However, if you then tried these on the tubular bells, this is what they sound like. Very, very soft, not a lot of definition there for the tubular bells. So very often with the tubular bells we have to use a completely different set of mallets. And so these are our wooden hammers that we use for those. These don't really work that well on many of the other instruments. They can sound very clumpy. So yeah, really these are exclusively for bells. So these are yarn sticks. These are quite hard, and they will get you around most of these instruments very, very well as well. Just about on suspended cymbals for us, but maybe a little bit hard. So then we'd go for the softer. These are now softer ones, and they'll give you a nice, much nicer sound. Okay, just a few instruments to go now. So if we look down here, we've got the trap tray. That can be part of our setup as well. Generally they are for sticks, although you can get some of the smaller percussion instruments on there as well. So I've got a nice range stick here. Believe it or not, we had to use this in a concert once, and it's a piece written by quite a young composer, and yeah, it was good fun. And then some of my favourite bird calls that I do like to use. Don't get asked to use them very often enough, but very, very good for education projects. Think we know what that noise is going to make. This is also one of my favourites. Doesn't look like much, but some great sounds in this. Yeah, like that one. And then, of course, I think we all know what this one does as well. And all sorts of other whistles as well. I left these out, the triangle sticks, little bits of metal, but actually, surprisingly, they can get you around some very nice sounds on some of these instruments. Got a little bell tree over here. And then also very nice. Metal on metal is obviously always going to be very, very nice. Now I think it's surprising actually, if you're careful, it's surprising because obviously you don't want to put dents and things in certain skins, but if you're careful then it is possible to get some good sounds from some of these other instruments as well. So tucked in behind me here I have the gong, so it's possible to hit this with a backstroke here. And then my final instrument, just over here, which I've managed to attach to a cymbal stand. There we go, there's the multi-percussion setup.
Hello, I'm Antoine Bedewi and I'm the principal timpanist of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. What you just heard is perhaps one of the most thrilling and recognisable openings in all of music, and it's certainly one of the most exciting timpani parts in the repertoire. And of course it's the opening of Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra. I'm backstage in Maidavale Studios in West London, and this room is where all the orchestra's timpani or kettle drums are stored. It's also where I spend a good deal of my time preparing the calf skins and generally making sure all the timpani are in good working order and carefully tuned, ready for our rehearsals and concerts. This short video will hopefully give you a good idea of what the timpani sound like and how they work, as well as a brief insight into what it's like to be an orchestral timpanist. Since the age of about 12, I've always wanted to be an orchestral timpanist. It was at that age when I first met the man who would later become my teacher for many years. He himself was the principal timpanist of the London Philharmonic Orchestra for the 70s and a good part of the 80s as well. And it was him who inspired me to pursue my career as a classical musician. I started learning the piano when I was young, and at school I added the drum kit and all the other percussion instruments as well. And it was through school and later at music college where I continued this study, and I always kept coming back to the timpani. I just was really drawn to the sound of the timps. I loved their power and their precision, and I also loved the sound of the orchestra as well. And I loved the sound of the timpani as part of the orchestra. And when I realised that there was all this incredible music written for the orchestra, I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. So you may not realise it, but there are a great many different designs of timpani. And what I have here are essentially the simplest of those designs. These little beauties were made about 10 years ago, which makes them very modern, but they're actually based on an old design dating back to antiquity. What we have here is a very simple drum and skin. So we have a copper bowl, which allows the sound to resonate. That's this thing here. And we have a circular piece of leather or parchment, which has been soaked in water and wrapped around a steel hoop and left to dry. And then it's been placed over the copper bowl and held in place by another steel hoop and then a series of screws, or taps as we call them. And I can go around the drum now, tightening and loosening these screws or taps, and that's how we adjust the tension and therefore achieve different notes. Now, long before the timpani appeared in any orchestra, they were highly prized military assets, and they were used to send orders across the battlefield. They were mounted on horseback, so one drum either side, obviously, with the soldier in the middle, and together with the buglers or trumpeters, they were used to sound the advance and literally to beat the retreat. It was considered a disaster to have your drums captured in battle, both practically and symbolically. Toward the end of the 17th century, the drums began to appear at the back of the opera pit, and composers slowly started to include them in their operas and orchestral works. Now, because at that time they always came in pairs, there were only two drums, it was therefore customary to tune them to the most important two notes in any piece, which, of course, are the tonic and the dominant. And so this is how we came to hear the timpani for the next 200 years, tonic and dominant. That was the very opening of Haydn's Symphony 103, which has been nicknamed the Drum Roll Symphony. And what I've just demonstrated is actually a little improvised solo that our principal conductor asked me to play at the start of one of our recent concerts. So as the 19th century gave way to the 20th century, composers were writing for ever bigger orchestras on a more grandiose scale. And it became fashionable to build larger, more mechanically sophisticated timpani. These drums here are our main instrument in the orchestra, and they were made in America to a German design dating from the 1950s. They're obviously much larger in every respect, and they produce much more sound than the little drums I've just shown you. But the idea is the same. So each of them has a copper bowl to help the sound resonate. These have a cast iron frame to hold them off the floor. And there's a circular piece of leather or parchment, and this one is made of calf skin. And it's stretched over the bowl and held in place by a series of screws and a cast iron counter hoop. But the main difference is that these drums, and as with all modern timpani, are fitted with pedals. And these pedals allow me to change the tension of the skin far more quickly and much more accurately than if I was just using hand taps. And in addition to the pedal, this drum has a fine tuner which is operated by hand, and it allows me to change the tension of the head in minute increments. So by using the combination of pedal and fine tuner, I'm able to precisely control my intonation and make sure it matches that of the orchestras. In the course of an evening's concert, the skins will be going out of tune all the time. And in fact, they're very rarely in tune, perfectly in tune, for more than about 5 minutes or so. And to deal with this, the timpanist needs to make constant corrections. And you'll often see the timpanist hunched over the drum with their head close to the skin to check and double check tuning as often as possible, making corrections with the pedal and the fine tuner as required. The skins are porous membranes, and as such they react very quickly to atmospheric changes and fluctuations in humidity. So when it's raining, for example, and it's very humid, the skins will suck up moisture and become quite saggy, and they flatten in pitch. And conversely, when the humidity dries up, the skins lose moisture and they become very taut and they go sharp. To deal with this, you've got to have a very good pair of ears, and you need to be constantly reacting and anticipating changes, not just in humidity, but also in temperature. So things like the concert lights will affect the skins as well. And you've got to have very good ears. And of course, it's considered very poor form for the timpanist, or any musician for that matter, to be out of tune. As the instrument evolved and the pedals became a standard feature of the timpani, composers such as Bartók, Janáček, and Britten, among others, decided to make good use of the pedals, and they began to write much more challenging and chromatic timpani parts to great effect. And that was an extract from Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra Intermezzo. It's worth mentioning here that while the chromatic possibilities of the modern timpani allow us to play pretty much any note or any series of notes in any order, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can just play anything. I remember once being asked if I could demonstrate something extreme, such as Fly to the Bumblebee, and I had to say, look, that sort of thing is technically and logistically not possible. If you are writing for the Tims, it's worth bearing in mind that we only really have room for 5, maximum 6 drums on stage, and we only have 2 hands and 2 feet, which means I can't change 3 notes at once, which I have been asked to do before. If you are composing something for the Tims and you're not sure if it's technically possible or if it's going to sound good or not, my advice would be to get in touch with your local orchestra or your local conservatoire and ask if a timpanist might be able to offer an opinion, and that way you'll know. Here's another example of chromatic writing for the pedal timpani, this time by Janáček in his Glagolitic Mass. A lot of composers chose to exploit the soloistic qualities of the timpani, and one dramatic example of that is the last movement of Mahler's 7th Symphony. So the tools of the trade are the sticks or mallets, and I have something like 50 different pairs here, ranging from very large and soft all the way to small and very hard, and plenty more pairs below decks here as well. You may wonder why I've got so many, and the simple answer is they're all different. And because we use sticks to achieve different colours and different sounds, depending on what the music requires, or often depending on what a conductor may request, it's really good to have a variety of mallets available so you can change if necessary. As I said, they're all different, and the difference is immediately apparent when you hear it. So here's a hard and a soft mallet. Now, as well as the calf and goat skins that we've already seen, we also have the option of using synthetic plastic heads, such as these. These are great because they're water resistant and largely unaffected by atmospheric conditions, and that makes them much more suitable for outdoor use and for travelling, as well as a lot of the contemporary music that we play. They actually sound very similar to the calf skins, and it takes a well-trained ear to be able to tell the difference on listening alone. In the main, the plastic heads ring a little bit longer and they produce more overtones, which, to be honest, they're quite hard to hear anyway. And I think they produce a fatter, meatier sound, which can work really well in certain situations, especially when you're in the studio recording film music, for example. These timpani are made by a British firm called Premier, and they're a fantastic design, a bit different to the German-style tims, in that the pedal and the fine-tuner are both operated by foot. They're a fantastic alternative instrument that we use quite often, and I really enjoy playing them. I'm often asked why I bother with the natural calf skins, given that the plastic heads are much easier to keep in tune and they last a lot longer, which makes them much cheaper. And the answer is they're useful for different things. For the more classical and romantic repertoire, I much prefer to use the calf heads as they allow me to produce a warmer sound, which can blend really well into the sound of the orchestra. And I tend to find conductors agree with that as well. On the other hand, there are times when I really enjoy the sound of the plastic heads, and it's nice to have the option. Composers often present us with interesting interpretive challenges. One such moment occurs toward the end of Elgar's Enigma variations in the penultimate movement, when Elgar asks for the timpani to play a very quiet role to accompany a clarinet solo. And curiously, he asks for side drum or snare drum sticks. Now, composers rarely ask or rarely specify which sticks that they would like, and when they do, it's usually to ask for hard or wooden sticks. In this case, Elgar's asked for side drum or snare drum sticks, but we would never use snare drum sticks on the timpani because it's possible to damage the heads with these. Instead, we have specially made wooden timpani mallets, which are much rounder and much more sonorous. Anyway, if I were to use wooden sticks at that moment, I'd run into all sorts of problems straight away. The first of these is it's extremely difficult to control the sound and evenness of a roll at triple P. And furthermore, there's no time to change to natural or warm felt sticks at figure 59, as he directs. So, over the years, timpanists have come up with lots of different ways to get around this little problem. One famously creative solution from yesteryear involves playing the roll with 2 half crowns. Now, we don't have half crowns anymore, of course. The closest to that would be a 10p coin. So I've got 2 10p coins, and this is what they sound like. That's very nice. I actually find it very awkward and difficult to hold the coins whilst also holding the mallets that I need for the next passage as well. So I actually like to employ a trick that my teacher taught me years ago, and which he used to play as well. And that involves playing with the fingernails. So what I would do is I would hold one of the mallets for the next passage and play the roll with my fingernails. there you have it. Hope you enjoyed a brief introduction to the timpani and what it's like to play them in an orchestra. Thanks for watching.
Hello, my name's Chris Hind and I've been in the BBC Symphony Orchestra for the last 19 years playing timpani and percussion. I'm going to talk about Latin instruments, unusual percussion and techniques, and finishing with a few light-hearted moments. Now, I don't profess to be a Latin specialist, but I'll give you a quick demonstration of some of the more familiar instruments and sounds. The first being claves. These are played by making a bed with one hand, putting one clave on the fingers so not to dampen it, and striking it with the other clave. Next, the guiro or gourd. So named as traditionally it's made from a dried shell of a gourd plant. Played with a small stick, different sounds can be made by varying the attack and length of scrape. And this is a cabasa, an instrument historically made from a gourd with beads around that rub along the ridges. The modern version, which I have here, is a wooden cylinder with a metal surface. And finally, the bongos. Bongos are the highest pitched hand drums of the Latin American family. Different sounds can be made by various methods, such as damping the skin with the hand or striking the drum on the rim or centre. We often have to play these instruments in a multi-percussion setup, requiring them to be put on stands and the bongos played with sticks. But now let's just hear how they come together played in the traditional way. The percussion family covers dozens of instruments, and in the BBC Symphony Orchestra we've been required to play some fairly novel ones, from striking metal filing cabinets to whirling plastic tubes above our heads, tearing up newspaper or throwing glass into a dustbin. In the next clip you'll see me practicing for a part I'd love to play. No, I haven't put the wrong clip on. Malcolm Arnold wrote a piece called A Grand Grand Festival Overture. Written for a large orchestra, he included parts for 3 vacuum cleaners, 2 uprights in B flat and 1 horizontal with detachable sucker in C, and an electric floor polisher in E flat. Unsurprisingly, he dedicated this piece to President Hoover. Here's another clip of another unique work which features percussion and a very original way of striking a bass drum. That was Andy Akio's Ricochet, commissioned in 2015. It's a triple concerto for violin, percussion and ping pong players. Finally, With all the musical and technical difficulties playing percussion comes some element of possible embarrassment and even danger, not only to the players themselves, but other musicians close by, as seen in these last few clips. Boom!